Welcome, everybody. We're just going to give the other attendees an opportunity to join. So just bear with us for another minute or so, and then we will start today's webinar. Great. Well, we'll make a start. So first of all, thank you very much for attending today's session. We're very much looking forward to hearing from Gareth Edwards, who joins us today from Go Code Green. For those of you who are less familiar with their services, Go Code Green was founded in 2021. It has a very straightforward mission, which is to decarbonise the planet's digital products and services. By no means an easy task. But they work with a combination of technologists, designers and consultants, and we're lucky enough to have Gareth with us today. So Gareth's role is their Chief Client Officer, who leads effectively Go Code Green's consulting practice. Gareth co-founded the Deloitte Digital Experience design practice in Scotland, and has worked for the likes of the Bank of Scotland, Standard Life, Scottish Widows. And also, as a keen cyclist, brings together his passion for technology and cycling, working alongside some of the world's most successful kind of pro teams. So we're very much looking forward to hearing a little bit more about Go Code's green approach to assessment, tooling to measure the impact of your ICT, and we're looking both at kind of hardware and software, and also the effectiveness of teams that support the development of your technology solutions. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions, both as we go. So please do post any of those questions to the Q&A, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. And similarly, we'll open up the webinar at the end for questions from all of you attending. So over to you, Gareth.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Thanks everybody for coming along, and thank you, Fiona, for the introduction. You've stolen two of my slides. That's fine. It saves me some time. I'll probably start with the stat you can see on screen. This is great when you get a recent stat which supports your arguments, but Gartner, who probably most of you have heard of, reckon that about 30% of operational emissions in enterprise come from ICT. Anecdotally, I was speaking to a colleague in retail banking for one of the big British banks, who estimates that they think their operational emissions from technology are nearer 50%. So a huge amount of emissions coming from the ICT stack, and our belief at Go Code Green is that by optimizing software, you can make a huge difference to the emissions in your operational emissions from ICT. So sustainability in a digital world. We've covered this, but I've been building digital products pretty much for 25 years. So I remember when we used to have to think about efficiency in digital products because bandwidth was really small and storage was expensive. And that's one of the fundamental principles which we need to, I guess, rediscover. And one of the things that we talk about quite a lot is we've removed constraints from design and delivery of digital products and digital experiences. And we now need to reapply them and reapply them in a different way to ensure that what we're delivering to our users or our customers is not only best for the business, best for the customer, but also best for the planet. A little bit about GoCo Green. We've been doing this for 3 years. The bit about the leadership team at the bottom, that just means we're all really old. We've been doing this for a long time. Therefore, we must believe in it. So hopefully that gives you some reassurance that we think this is a valid use of our time. As Fiona touched on, we have a platform measures the carbon impact of software and ICT estate. We also support people on that journey to decarbonising with advisory services. We work with the UN, and obviously we are now B Corp certified as well, which is fantastic. Probably most importantly for all of you, the black box, which is our measurement tool, has been ratified and reviewed by some of the leading experts in the academic space, Edinburgh Climate Change Institute and Climate UEA, and also now by Gartner as well, who think we are cool, which is a rare thing for us to be able to say. Starting quite basic, like most industries, sustainability and ESG contains lots of jargon, lots of lingo, and I kind of want to demystify that a little bit. I don't want to teach people to suck eggs, but just so we've all got a baseline, what do we mean by a ton of carbon? To offset a ton of carbon takes about 46 trees. It does depend on the tree, but 46 of your standard British trees to offset 1 ton of carbon, or it's equivalent to about driving 2,500 miles. So it's a pretty significant amount of carbon. And when you start to see some of the numbers that you can save, you'll start to realise that there isn't enough room to plant all the trees that we would need to make the impact we need to. A little bit about scope 1, 2, and 3. Again, trying to steer clear of using this language too much, but scope 1 is the coal you burn in your fireplace or the wood you burn in your log burner. Scope 2 is the electricity used to power your on-premises servers or to power your laptop. Scope 3 is everything else. So unsurprisingly, probably for most organizations in this space, the majority of their emissions sit in scope 3. So your cloud hosting costs, any software you use, SaaS software, HubSpot, Canva, they are all scope 3 emissions. And increasingly, there's an expectation that you need to have a handle on measuring your scope 3 emissions. And that's one of the things that perhaps Fiona and the guys will talk to you about later down the line. Scope 3 emissions reporting is definitely something that's coming. So why does it matter? So for those of you who don't necessarily know what we mean by embodied carbon, you've got an iPhone or a Google phone or whatever device you have, they approximately weigh about 150 grams. They don't have 150 grams of emissions in embodied carbon. It's nearer about 85 for the iPhone Pro Plus I've got, or about 70 kilograms for a standard Google phone. Huge amount of carbon. So you can imagine it doesn't take many phones to deliver the 1 ton of carbon we just talked about, in terms of having to have 46 trees to offset that. So a huge amount of embodied carbon in the devices that we use every single day. And I guess we're all used to considering emissions as things we can see, or having an understanding of our role in sustainability. It's the recycling box in our driveway, or it's the emissions you can see from a diesel car as it drives along, or from a power station. One of the things that, and one of the reasons we do these kinds of kind of talks is to raise awareness that digital has emissions. Digital uses electricity, therefore it is generating emissions. So moving that mindset forward and thinking about, anything you do in the digital world is having an impact. Use the idea of flying and technology's relationship with flying and the emissions from flying and the emissions from technology. So ICT now accounts for nearly 6% of global emissions. So it's 3 times worse than flying. And we rather deliberately use Ryanair, or sometimes a picture of Mr. O'Leary as the surprising face of sustainability. And not necessarily because I'm implying they care about the planet, but because they care about money. And the emissions from aviation have largely remained stable since the 80s and early 90s. And it's because they've been on a massive efficiency drive. Lighter seats, thinner seats, less luggage on planes, better fuel, more aerodynamic planes have effectively meant that aviation has kind of remained stable in terms of its relative proportion of emissions globally. Whereas in technology, we haven't really considered those things. And that's seen our emissions grow rapidly. The statistic of 6%, you'll see 4%, 6%, and I've even seen one more than 7%, doesn't take into account things like the rapid growth in the use of generative AI. So streaming, another one of these areas where we've seen huge growth. I'm sure you've all got Apple Music or Spotify or one of those tools. Probably all got at least one of the TV streaming tools. Great. And this is now starting to become an issue that is mainstream. So Rolling Stone recently wrote an article, Protect the Planet, Stop Streaming Songs. I think the premise was that most of us only really listen to 600 to 800 songs, so why not download them rather than stream them? And every single time you stream a song, you're effectively downloading it once again. And of course, that comes at a cost. There's a great statistic there about Olivia Rodrigo's single, equivalent to flying London to New York 4,000 times. That was just in one calendar year. Relating our back to aviation, but most of you will be aware of Taylor Swift and her flying challenge in 2023, where I think she had 8,500 tons of emissions from flying. Just on her Spotify account, the streaming for her back catalogue equated to 800,000 tons of carbon. So 100 times more than her flying. So you can see it quickly adds up. And we need to consider now how we continue to use those tools. And no one's saying don't stream songs or don't download music, but just be a bit more thoughtful about how we do it, because it really does start to have an impact. Back to AI. So some of you might have come across this stat already, but every time we use one of the large language models, and ChatGPT being probably the most prevalent one, but whether you're using Claude or some of the newer LLMs out there, every conversation consumes about half a litre of water, which I'm sitting here in very wet Scotland. We're fine, we've got loads of water. But as you can imagine, water has become an increasingly scarce resource, and as a subject of a huge amount of conversation in the sustainability space, particularly because of the way that the servers for generative AI are cooled, or water cooled. It already accounts for 1% of global electricity usage. That was at the start of 2024. Some of you may have heard tell of a nuclear reactor being unmothballed in New York recently to power a data center to run generative AI. So the use of AI is going to have a huge impact on us. All of our roles, all of our jobs, all the experiences we have. But I guess what we're saying here is we need to use this thoughtfully, because there's not enough electricity in the world to power the potential use of Gen AI. There's certainly not enough green electricity in the world to power Gen AI. So really need to consider how we use those tools moving forward. So we're all using data centers, no doubt, and they already account for 3% of the world's electricity bill. Again, like all statistics, these get out of date very quickly. This is from 2021, and I suspect it's north of 4% already, just from data centers, and they're already accounting for 2% of the world's emissions. So again, we're seeing this growth in the emissions from technology, but not a lot of thought going into how we mitigate that. Nice comparison for those who like one of these. So if we were a country, the ICT industry, we'd be the 6th biggest emitter on the planet, placing it somewhere north of Germany. So yeah, we've got some work to do. And it's going to get worse. So that's actually from 2019. and I've been doing some digging on this particular statistic recently to ensure its validity. We're still well on track to account for 20% of global electricity consumption by 2030, just powering ICT and data centers. Again, there is very difficult to take into consideration the impact of AI, as you probably get a sense that with the unmothballing of nuclear reactors, for example, we are in a very emerging space in terms of how much it's going to need, how much electricity we're going to need to power this stuff. So it's growing rapidly. So taking control of your technology emissions now, or as soon as you can do, is hugely important. Not least because the regulators in this space are starting to take a very keen eye on the amount of electricity usage that's coming in this space and how they're going to measure and report that. It's going to become increasingly important. So we've got 5 things that we think we can all do, which should help you to reduce your impact. So for those of you who are product businesses, technology product businesses on the call, whether you're improving your product or you are designing new products from scratch, adding sustainability as a lens in all product development is the first recommendation we would make. Really considering all elements of your product from paper to prototype to scale, adding sustainability and adding an additional tension into that product development process. So we've been chatting to one of the biggest testing businesses in the world, and they are starting to look at how they add sustainability as part of their multivariate testing process. So here is the ideal customer experience, and from a digital perspective, here is the most sustainable digital experience. What is the thing in the middle which still delivers the key metrics, still delivers the business metrics and KPIs that you're looking for, but delivers 50 to 80% of the sustainability reductions that you're looking for. And there's lots of ways you can do that, both with engineering choices, technology choices, supply chain choices, and design choices as well. Sophie, saw a hand raised there. Gone away. So adding sustainability as a lens in all product development, just adding that additional attention, hugely important moving forward. A little bit of an example of this. VW, about 3 years ago, when they were first really investing in promoting their electric vehicles, delivered a sustainable browsing experience. This isn't necessarily someone we recommend, because effectively what it means is you're building 2 websites. But what they were trying to do for us is really important. They were raising awareness that it's not just the car that's sustainable, it's everything, it's the entire service around it that also needs to be sustainable. And I think the statistic is about 78% of users chose the sustainable browsing experience. And that's emboldened VW to embed sustainable digital practices into the future delivery of all their new vehicle websites. The image on the right of their ID4 vehicle in this example is actually entirely ASCII code, and it's incredibly small file size. Not only is it clever, it's also a great marketing gimmick, but as I said, they now embed those practices into all of their future websites and have reduced, I think, in about 50% of their carbon emissions from their websites have been taken out by moving to this approach. Supply chain. It's probably an important one for most businesses. We use the example here of hosting. There are lots of elements of the technology supply chain which you can influence. But again, slightly older statistic. I think it's near 0.5% now, but moving to cloud doesn't necessarily make you green. Whatever you may be told by our CSP, only 0.13% or 0.43%, I think, is the most recent statistic of cloud hosts or hosting providers globally are certified green. So huge amount of work to do. to ensure that hosting is green. But what we're asking you to do is consider all elements of your supply chain. So for your app, you're choosing between a number of technology platforms, whether it be a CRM, CMS, or other tools that are part of your technology mix, being provided by a third party. Start to ask them some difficult questions. What are your scope 3 emissions to me? Being the obvious one. They probably won't be able to answer, but you're starting to influence the conversation by asking the question, asking about their certification of their green hosting, if that's part of their sales message. There are green hosts out there. There are green technology providers out there, and later on we can talk about the choices that you can make in that space, and why being seen as sustainable can be also pretty profitable for your business. Measure your impact. Can't measure it, you can't improve it. This is the fundamental, part of what we do. But measuring your software impact, you can do it just like you can any other product. There are a series of protocols out there, THC protocols, which allow you to measure the carbon impact of building a thing, improving a thing, and maintaining a thing. And that's what we use. That's the fundamental basis of our model. So we measure the footprint of software, and then we give you the potential to reduce that, the impact of that piece of software. On average, in our work, we've seen opportunity to reduce of around 50 to 55% for every piece of software we measure, and that's in the hundreds now. So you can imagine that, whatever steps you take to design and deliver a piece of software, there are things that you can do to improve its efficiency. And very happy to get into some of the kind of big levers that you can do in that. But the starting point is measurement. Understand it. And going back to something I touched on earlier, measuring it now allows you to take action later, but measuring it now also allows you to report accurately your emissions. And again, with regulation and reporting requirements increasing in this space, taking that action now to start measuring the impact of your platform is super important. Not only because you want to understand it, but you may be one of the suppliers that you, me, or another business might be asking the awkward question of, what are your scope 3 emissions to me? Or understand the impact of poorly optimized software. What do I mean by this? So if you have an older phone or an older laptop, you're probably very aware of your software running slowly in it. I know it's the constant complaint of my children. My phone is slow, it is terrible, I need a new one. And my usual response is, have I replaced the chipset? Have I made it slower for you? And the reality is, of course, the software that we're running on our phones is all asking a lot more of the compute power of that particular device. It's not the fact that the phone is slower. In the same way, I would argue, could you run modern Excel on a 20-year-old laptop? And the answer is probably not. And I would argue that Excel doesn't necessarily do a huge amount more now than it did 20 years ago. Software engineers are programmed now or trained now to get the most out of the target device rather than delivering the most efficient experience. And that's something that we're super keen to change, that mindset. Delivering the best optimized software rather than just delivering the best software. And people play a huge part in that. One of the things that we do in this space is we measure the impact of engineers on the process and the overall impact of the software, and things like their DevOps awareness, their agility, their awareness of sustainable software engineering techniques all make a difference on the ongoing impact of software. So there's no point doing a digital decarbonisation exercise if the engineers who continue to maintain that product are continuing to deliver suboptimal, sustainable software. So really considering that as part of your process. Could our software be impacting our hardware further down the line? And in a scale organization, you can potentially understand that with better optimized software, you might get another year out of your laptops. So you might move your regeneration cycle or repurchase cycle from 3 years to 4 years, or from 4 years to 5, and the same with your mobile devices. And it's the same knock-on effect into your cloud data service and your telecom network. It's all interlinked, and software is the thing that drives that. Five more than one thing. So, but it is very much focused on your own individual impact and your own individual impact within your organization. So we talk about considering your communication and channel choices. Probably most of you have got more than one. You probably all got email and maybe Slack, or maybe you've got WhatsApp, or using Jira or Confluence or other tools like that as well. Every one of those third-party tools has a platform impact, and every one of those third-party tools has an incremental message impact. So a typical email, for example, can be anywhere between 1 gram and 20 grams to store that email every year. So it's annualized the way we measure carbon. So it's for every single year you leave that in your inbox, it adds up to a large amount of carbon. And probably there's a lot of emails sitting in your inbox you don't need anymore. We had a team we worked with in the public sector in the NHS here in Scotland. And across a team of 30, they managed to delete 1.5 million emails that had sat for, in some cases, more than a decade on the server. I remember a time when I had quite a small mailbox, and I had to constantly consider what emails I kept and didn't keep. And again, because storage has become cheap, we've kind of lost track of that efficiency and keeping on top of stuff. So consider how you use email. We've got one of our clients has now moved to changing their footer. And in their footer now it says, if I don't reply to say thanks, take it as implied, so that they reduce the number of back and forth emails within the organization. But really focusing on channel choice. Every time you choose a channel, do you need 3, 4, 5 different communication channels, or can you get away with just 1 or 2? Review your use of collaboration platforms. What I mean by that, are you using multiple video platform tools like Zoom or Teams or others? Which one's the lowest impact? There is quite a significant difference between a Zoom call and a Teams call in terms of carbon impact. Some tools are better for your organization depending on the location, for example. But also file sharing. We're still organizationally, I guarantee you've all had a large file sent to you recently. Sometimes there's no way around it, particularly cross-organization, but really reviewing your use of collaboration tools. How can you better share files across platforms without creating unnecessary carbon? Regular breaks from social media. This is a big part of this for us, is that digital detox element is hugely important. And a statistic that relates to this one. So a domestic flight, so Edinburgh to London, for example, could be offset with just 10 days off typical social media usage. So you can really start to think about how impactful your social media usage is in terms of carbon. It just takes 10 days to offset a domestic flight. It's huge. But equally, it's for your peace of mind as well as peace of the planet. To take some regular breaks from social media. Windows time to clean the digital footprint. I guarantee you've all got 1,000 pictures on your phone of receipts or screenshots or whatever it may be. Again, each one of them comes with a cost, both on your device and in the cloud, and you can make an individual impact. As I said, each one of those will probably have, 5 to 10 grams of associated carbon with it, because it's being stored in multiple locations. So if you don't need it, get rid. And final one, download your favorite music, don't stream it. This is, quite a personal one for me. It's crazy that we are still seeing this, behavior where we know there's 500-600 songs. And one of the things we'd love to be able to do is influence Spotify in terms of the way they build their model, so that they know when you're listening to their music, but they can suggest that you download it instead of stream it. It's a huge impact in terms of carbon. So we also argue that thinking sustainability is an opportunity, not a threat, although I'll challenge myself because there's one threat in here. Products marketed as sustainable grow 2.7 times faster than those that are not. I had a great conversation with a retail bank recently who were looking to launch a green mortgage, and that was going to be priced as a more expensive product than their standard retail mortgage. And I asked them the question, why? And they said, because green is always more expensive, and I don't believe it should be. The argument in the technologist perspective is, if you can reduce your emissions, you should be reducing cost. If you're reducing cost, why can that not be passed on to the consumer or to your clients? So in a like-by-like comparison to similar products, the sustainable one will be the one people buy. And we imagine a future where you might visit the App Store and you will have 2 camera apps. One will have a green tick to say it is sustainable, one will not. And I can guarantee you that the one with the green tick will be the one with the most downloads. And we see this all the time. So really consider whether adding sustainability to your product features could be the thing that elevates above your competition. We've done a lot of work in this space now with 45 active enterprise clients across financial services, energy and government, and we've seen a 29% emissions base from ICT across those. So particularly given that we're working with energy businesses, you're obviously in the business of emitting, a really high proportion of their emissions still coming from ICT. And it's growing. Great chart that I saw at our conference recently. Everyone's trying to reduce their operational emissions and very much focused on their measurement today and what they want it to be by 2035 or 2040. But what they're not taking into consideration is the increased use of technology, again, back to the increased use of generative AI and the increased rollout of that. They estimated that by 2035, there will be 1 human employee for every 100 AI employees in enterprise organizations. So huge growth going to come from that. So we expect to see that number grow quite significantly. And based on our work today, we see a double-digit emissions reduction opportunity. So 29% of your emissions are coming from technology. We think you can reduce that by half. Lower bills, lower emissions usually correlates to lower bills, particularly if you're reducing your compute costs. The threat that I talked about, climate quitting is quite a real thing. Some of you may have experienced already. I know I'm having worked with some of the big law firms in both London and Edinburgh. They're being asked some very difficult questions by new graduates who have choices. A statistic comes from KPMG from a report they did last year, but 1 in 5 have turned down a job offer when the company's ESG commitments are not in line with their values. And that has led to also people quitting because values or purported values have not led to the expected outcomes within their role. So it's a real opportunity to retain people by being as sustainable as you make out to be, but a threat if not looked at carefully. So a little bit of a recap. Think sustainably about all your products and innovation work particularly. So how do you ensure that you add that light sustainability lens or bake in sustainability into the work that you do? Consider your supply chain. How green is it really? Ask difficult questions. I don't think it's necessarily going to change who you purchase from, but by starting to ask the question and by starting to look at businesses that can answer that, you're already starting to make a difference. Measure everything that you can. A lot of you may already be measuring other areas of emissions. You might be looking at staff travel. You may be looking at the operational emissions from your buildings, but start to include your software and your hardware in that as well. Understand the relationship between hardware and software. This is the key bit to digital decarbonisation. So bad, poorly optimized software will lead to higher emissions, higher costs. And finally, take some action. We're running out of time. Most of you have probably seen COP29 was last week. We've already surpassed the 1.5-degree increase. So we can do something in this space. And I think the great thing about focusing on your technology emissions is it's just code. We can change it. We can make a difference, either through training your people, making different technology choices, asking difficult questions to your suppliers, but you can really make a difference pretty quickly by looking at technology estate. And that is me. Questions?
Thank you very much, Gareth. So yeah, if any of you as attendees have got questions, please do post them to the Q&A, and we'll happily sort of work through those. But in the meantime, Gareth, we had quite an interesting discussion just before we came on air in relation to, I guess, the question around this ability to influence key actors in the supply chain, Google, Azure, AWS. Which actually sort of resulted in you sharing some insights about companies bringing their hosting back in-house, which is obviously a trend that we saw. Interesting to hear that trend reversing. Could you unpack that a little bit for us?
So one of the kind of so Gartner talks a lot about this stuff at the moment, and they obviously you sort of lead into their research quite heavily. What they're seeing a trend in, and it's particularly as it talks about the growth in the use of AI and this, I guess, how organizations are now being fearful of cost, is the element of control. And cloud has seen, costs skyrocket for hosting, and people feel out of control in terms of managing that. So they're talking about this delivery of what they call microgrids. So for small businesses, it's quite hard to do. It's effectively, saying we're going to put up, we're going to create our own wind farm, and we're going to create our own electricity grid, and we're going to power our own servers from that. But there is definitely a trend with some businesses who are being quote unquote forced onto the cloud by particular providers of saying, well, actually, no, that's not right for us. And we had a particular case with a European energy business who were a lifetime, definitely when I'm a Microsoft client, and nothing against Microsoft in this example, but because of the software that they had and how it was optimized, and because of the data center they had, they did a before and after, effectively, what is the emissions and energy usage today, and what will it be when we move it to cloud? And they realized by moving it to cloud, their emissions were going to go up because their data center was well optimized, and their costs would have gone up. So they stopped it and they kept it on-prem. It's not always the right answer, because it's getting the match right between the software and the hardware is always the most difficult thing. And one of the things that we do is we can predict the impact. So here's how something is engineered. What will the impact be if we move it to cloud? And it's, as I said, it's not always the right answer, particularly because this idea that it's greener in the cloud is just a fallacy. It would be if you designed your software specifically to be in the cloud, and you can guarantee that the electricity is coming from renewables. But as you saw from that slide earlier on, that's really hard to do. So there are, as I said, there are specific green cloud providers out there who are certified and B Corp, and all the good things to make sure that they are what they say they are. But a lot of the big CSPs have taken a very different approach to how they report this stuff. So AWS famously doesn't report its Scope 3 emissions as part of its overall emissions. That's probably 70 to 80% of their overall emissions. So they seem dramatically lower than Azure and Google, but obviously aren't, because they're just not telling you a huge amount on where their emissions are coming from. So it's an emerging trend. It's about ongoing control. It's about taking ownership of the roadmap of future software, and feeling that, I was speaking to an organization the other week at a conference who SAP were forcing them on a cloud migration, but they were very happy with their software. They were very happy with their on-prem instance, and they felt almost lost a little bit because they didn't want to change, they didn't want to move because of the fear about it, the ongoing cost. So I think it's something that we will see a lot more of, and I think, as I said, particularly as you see generative AI growing really, really quickly, people understanding how they can take control of that electricity supply.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I guess sort of reflecting on some of those points, Gareth, we've had a question there, which is often one that we hear here at BGF, which is, in order to get internal buy-in with senior leadership, how can you best engage with the board, senior management on this topic? Because I guess from what we've heard today, there may be a perception here that it's going to require additional resource, which equates to additional cost in order to identify all these efficiencies. I guess when we're talking at board level, we're often having to justify these kind of decisions with respect to the level of return on investment, the payback period. So have you got any sort of examples of how you've engaged with the board and, some demonstrable kind of projects where you've had to sort of evidence that cost benefit analysis?
Absolutely, and it comes down to profitability, doesn't it? We look at, so as I said, we work with a lot of the big banks and a lot of government agencies, and we talk a lot about citizen value. And we talk a lot about profitability. Fundamentally, the cost of decarbonising your tech is far outweighed by the potential upside, the potential savings. So a lot of the decisions that you can make, it's about having more control of the environment you're looking after, which you should be aiming for anyway, from a best practice perspective, and then B, making active decisions to turn stuff off. So we had one example where so we have a tool as part of our product suite. Effectively, it's an estimation tool. So it looks at your entire estate, and we work with clients who have, in some cases, a couple of thousand different applications running. So they're not going to be able to invest in a full decarbonisation of 2,000 applications. It's not a practical exercise, but they could invest in 50 to 100. So which 50 to 100 do you go invest in? So we use a tool to scan their environment to effectively extract information from their environment and give them an estimation where the big carbon sits, and therefore what the opportunity to reduce is, and therefore what the opportunity to generate savings is. So those are some of the tools that we use. So actually data is really, really powerful, and it's really low cost to do that kind of thing. And the other, the outcome of that one was that they had, I think, 150 applications which were marked for decommissioning, that they hadn't done anything with because other projects had got in the way. And adding the carbon lens, and therefore the pounds pence reduction, which would also accelerate their operational emission reductions, was again a much easier argument for them to take to board to say, well, actually, we should put a team on this because there's money sitting here that we're spending unnecessarily, and it's never going to reach the top of the priority list. But actually, now it does, because of we have operational emissions reductions targets. We've got budget targets to hit as well. That for us, that's the key one. As I said, some of the other financial metrics are harder to demonstrate, but culturally, the ability to retain people, not greenwashing, again, it should be higher on the agenda for people. And it does send the right message organizationally, particularly to engineers as well. Engineers love being trained, so improving their tech skills, improving the efficiency of your technology stack, and therefore reducing your emissions and reducing cost. It has a sort of win-win element to that. We think there's lots of it just depends on the makeup of your board. We recognise there's lots of people, boards that are not massively focused on sustainability. Most boards are focused on profitability, and for us, the argument is pretty simple: you're spending money you don't have to.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay, and then so I suppose linked to that, we've talked a little bit about kind of ICT applications, etc. There's the additional step, which is of interest to a lot of the attendees today, which is around designing your software to be more sustainable.
Yeah.
So, does Go Code Green have a sort of series of resources or a tool, or how do you sort of work with companies in order to support those software engineers, the designers, to ensure that you're kind of hard baking that into the product or service
Um,
that you're developing?
yeah, so a big part of what we do, and it wasn't necessarily, in fact, it was never part of the original plan. So we offer a whole bunch of training in this space now. And we did that because once we started the measurement piece, we suddenly realized how big an influence the experience and training of the engineers or the designers on the project had on the end outcome. And actually, a client said, "Can you tell us how we could be better at this?" And we went and created some training courses. So we have a bunch of free tools out there. So through our website, there are some kind of self-assessment tools, if you like, for both engineers and designers and technology leaders as well. So to get a sense of your awareness of this skill. So you might think you've got it all under control. Great, go to the self-assessment and get a sense of if you are or not. Or you may think you've got a lot to learn. Again, use the self-assessment tool on the website. That'll give you a sense of where you're at. And then we offer training to support that. But there's also a bunch of free resources on the site. So we've got some design checklists, or green design checklists, steps to consider in developing a new product, which you can go and download for free, which should absolutely help bake some of that stuff in. When we shared the slides afterwards, there's an appendix with some really kind of basic kind of things to think about, particularly in that kind of visual design space, of things that can make a difference. I think I always use the example of Patagonia as being a great example of a business that's fantastic at being sustainable in its physical stores, and has really given that a huge amount of thought. If anyone's ever been into a Patagonia store, there's usually a plaque on the wall. It tells you where the bricks came from, tells you the builder that put them there, tells you where the wood came from, how it's all local and sustainably sourced. If you do a carbon impact measurement on the website, it comes up as terrible. And there's no plaque on that saying, we host it in this place and it's really green, and look at the lovely environment it's looking after, and it's water cooled and heating local swimming pools, or any of the other things that it could do. So there's lots of design choices they could make differently, which would make a huge impact on their digital delivery, particularly as 80% of their transactions are done online. So when we share the slides afterwards, there's a kind of little cheat sheet at the bottom as well, which people can use. But it's easy examples. Does your video need to autoplay? No. So that has quite a significant impact on the experience of delivering the website, but this doesn't need to. People can choose to play it or not play it, and that's your signal, and that can make a huge difference. So little things like that in the visual design space can help, but then engineering choices further down the line can have really big impact. Just things like language choice. So obviously huge growth in use of Python, for example. That's a very bad language for sustainability. I'm not the expert to tell you why it's a bad language for sustainability, but we know that Python has a huge impact on the impact and the carbon impact of an application. So things like that, again, you can pick up most of that from our foundation course.
Excellent. Well, that's been a really rich session, Gareth. Appreciate your time. I think what I just want to sort of say is some closing remarks here are that, BGF has also been working with Go Code Green. There's still a lot of work and a lot of options there that we need to explore ourselves. But we're always happy to share our experience of what we're learning as we go through that process. We will, as Gareth has alluded to, be uploading this recording and the slides to Portfolio Exchange. So, feel free to revisit today's recording. And we'll also be sharing Gareth and Go Code Green's details there. So certainly if you want to follow up on any aspects of today's discussion, then please, reach out directly to Gareth and or myself. I'll be happy to link you up. So yeah, with that, a big thanks to you today, Gareth. I've also learned a lot through today's session. So really appreciate the thought that you've put into preparing the webinar. Yeah, we look forward to following up with those of you who've been able to attend the call today. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Cheers, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.